let's start. So it seems like globalization got into our way to launch. I mean, it's kind of last obstacle before launch. So let's take the topic quickly. And what I would like to do today is to walk you through all the support that we've got currently in AngularJS for writing international application or application for the international audience. And as you are going to see, the built-in mechanisms are not enough. And the building for the international audience is the way of life for many teams. So many members of the community build in-house solutions or in-house extensions, sometimes publish them as the open source project, sometimes did not. So I would like to look at those. And the last part of the presentation will be going into what is cooking in the AngularJS 1.4 and Angular 2.0 to make this globalization efforts even easier. So I just realized that I didn't introduce myself. So my name is Pawel. I'm climbing and doing open source. I never can decide which one is more important for me. But for the open source, I'm the core member of the AngularJS team. I'm messing with some other open source projects. You can see my code on the GitHub or follow me on Twitter if you are into those kind of things. But we are not here to talk about me, but actually we need to come back to the topic of globalization. So what does it mean to write an application or AngularJS application for the international audience? I guess that the first thing that comes to people's mind is translation. Because obviously this is the biggest part of the effort. We need to take all those strings that we've built in English, Dutch, or whatever our language is, and translate them to all the languages or locales that we need to support. But obviously translations are just part of the entire effort. We need to make sure that we format all the data correctly. So by data, I mean like numbers, so that we've got all the decimal and thousand separators, right? I'm talking about dates. So we use the proper format. We use the days and month names in the current language and locale. But there are more subtle things as well, like, for example, pluralization or handling input in the given locale. So, for example, allowing people to insert numbers using the local specific thousand and decimal separators. So there's this whole bunch of things that we really need to take care of to make sure that our application is really available in all the locales. So before we dive into the details, let's get our terminology straight. So we often talk about internationalization and localization. So this is the definition from Wikipedia. It's saying like that internationalization is the process of designing a software application so that it can be potentially adapted to various languages and regions without engineering changes. Whatever definition. And there is another one for localization. You can read it. But like translating this from Wikipedia to the human language, internationalization is basically building the whole infrastructure, all the technical pieces that allows us to actually take one application, do all the translation, do all the local specific stuff, and ship the country specific or local specific version. And like, you know, like many people are wondering from why we're talking about E18 or in 10. So obviously those words like internationalization and localization are quite long and mouthful. So people like abbreviate it. And E18 stands for like number of letters that we've got between I18 and then the same for localization. So what we've got in AngularJS as it stands today in 1.3 to support those globalization efforts. So first of all, Angular distribution comes with a set of local specific files that hold some interesting data. Maybe instead of like, theoretically speaking about this, I will show you those files. So if you go into any distribution of AngularJS, you will see that there's this E18 subfolder. And as you can see, there are files for many locales inside. And if you open one of those files, let's do it for Dutch. I don't understand any Dutch, so you can tell me if it's any good or not. So you can see that inside this file, there's a definition of the ng-local, of the ng-local module. And inside there, you've got some translations for the name of days of the week, months, and blah, blah, blah. As well as some default formats for dates, for the numbers, and so on. Right? So, so those data are actually not painfully prepared by the AngularJS team, but they are extracted from the repository that is called CLDR, which stands for Unicode for, I never remember this name actually. It's called Unicode Common Local Data Repository. Whatever it's called, it's just basically a huge repository that holds all the local specific data in the XML format. So I guess Angular team wasn't very happy about the XML format, so they decided that instead of extracting those data from the repository itself, we are going to extract those data from the closure library that actually had already those data extracted in the more consumable format. I think it's JSON or some kind of version of JavaScript files. Those files, like those files in the E18 folder, are generated on demand. They are not generated on each release. So it's just important. I'm just saying this because people often are reporting bugs in those files. So just important to know that if you spot anything for your local that is not right, you just need to check first the CLDR repository, closure library, and lastly, just to see if the files in the Angular output folder are correct or not. So as soon as we know that those files exist, it's very simple to use them. You actually include a file that is specific to your local, and then you declare dependency on the ng-local module. And even looking at this very simple example, you can probably realize a couple of things. First is that it seems kind of pretty static in the sense that you have to include a file. And this is kind of static by design. So in AngularJS itself, there is no built-in method for switching locales on the fly. I'm just saying that there is no official method because many people figured out how to do this using more or less obscure hacks. But like it can be done. The other thing is that this should be included into some kind of landing page, like index, HTML, or something like this. And you probably want to generate this landing page on the server side to determine a user locale based on the, I don't know, the header sent by a browser, I don't know, profile data, or some kind of other settings that you might have in your application. Anyway, as soon as this setup is done, you can take advantage of the built-in data. And some of the built-in filters actually understand the local specific data. So for example, here's the date formatting, right? I mean, I guess this should be proper Dutch. I don't know. This is the Dutch locale included. There is the same story for the number filter. I guess it's the proper formatting for the decimal and thousand separator. There is another filter called currency, which is kind of really weird filter in the sense that this is just number filter that sticks the local specific currency symbol in front or at the back of the number, whatever the local specific setting is. But here's the insanity warning. This just will take any number and stick this local currency symbol. So if you've got a number and you are showing a price for your customers, for example, you might have your euros turned into dollars just by switching locale, which I guess with the current exchange rate is not that bad. But you could have this switch to Indian rupees, which God forbid. So I mean, my quick advice, just stay away from it unless you're into having those funny conversions. So the other part that is built into AngularJS 1.3 is ng pluralize directive. which is nothing more than a fancy switch statement that allows you to input or output message based on some kind of number, right? So this is just basically, we've got some kind of number here, and we are doing a switch on it. And obviously, this is not doing anything fancy. We could do the same thing with some kind of if or switch statement in a template. The good part about this pluralize directive is that it's kind of pulling all those messages that are, let's say, number that have some connection with the number. It's pulling it into one place. So if we need to translate it, it's enough to ship this one chunk to a translator. And they will have the whole content in one place. I mean, they will understand that this is not that this one is not an isolated message, the other one is not isolated message, but is the one kind of message that just looks differently depending on the number. So it's important to keep this context while shipping this whole chunk of code to translators. So the sad story is that it's more or less everything that's available in the current version of AngularJS. And it's sad because it's not enough, right? I mean, it's definitely not enough to build an application like a truly international applications. And because of this, the whole community had to step in and say, like, okay, I mean, we need to build those bridges, right, for the parts that don't exist. And the big non-present thing here is obviously translations. So this problem was tackled pretty early in the AngularJS by the community. And one of the first things that people will realize, we can actually use filters, right? Because filters are doing some kind of transformation. So what's going on here is that we extract some ID for the message that needs to be translated. Then we've got some kind of JSON file or whatever other file that have, for a given locale, it will have this ID corresponds to title in English, title in Polish, or some other thing in Dutch. So this is the approach that is taken by the famous Angular Translate library. We've got Pascal here, which is the father of it. Like a big shout to Pascal, right? Woo! Right, building bridges, building bridges. Unfortunately, this is very easy and to understand, very easy to implement, and it kind of has other cool properties. Like, for example, it's very dynamic. You can switch locales on the fly and so on and so forth. But because of the way Angular works internally, or because of its performance characteristics, this approach taken as is, it has some like performance penalties that we need to pay. Because basically what we are doing here, we are taking one static part of the template and we are turning it into dynamic binding. And we will do it for each and every message, which means that we are increasing the number of bindings on the page. And as we all know, the performance or responsiveness of the AngularJS page is directly proportional or directly correlated with the number of watches that we've got on the page. So one way of dealing with this problem is using a directive and doing a translation in the linking function, which eliminates the watch. But unfortunately, we cannot use the directive everywhere. For example, if we need to translate a placeholder in the input tag, you need to kind of prefixes, you translate /placeholder and so on. So it's kind of getting verbose. In 1.3 situation got slightly better because we've got one-time bindings. So we are eliminating the watches on the running page. But what you need to know is that even if those thing is called, this one thing is called one-time binding for a reason. So we've got an initial binding. I mean, Angular will observe this thing initially anyway, just to stabilize the value. So we've got the watch that is only initially there, but we still got one watch. So some people were saying, okay, this dynamic translation in the browser is very cool, but we care so much about the performance that we don't want to take any risk. And we will do translations on the server side during the build time. So the basic idea here is that you take your templates, you replace the places to translate with some kind of templates, like a server-side template, so you could use, like, I don't know, FreeMarker or some kind of other templating engine, and you do this substitution of the things on the server side during the build time. So this kind of method of approaching things is advocated by many people that are like performance obsessed, and I think this was what Google was saying that they're using for their applications. Unfortunately, every person that like says like I'm doing this, it's either doing it in a kind of proprietary way, like they've got some kind of build system that is specific to the company. So all the descriptions that you can find on the internet of this method is kind of hand-waving thing, like, yeah, we do this, you know, we've got our custom build step, we've got our custom database, and so on and so forth. So there is, to my knowledge, no one open source project that would be that you can just kind of drop in a Gulp plugin that you can do all the translations of the templates. The other problem with this approach is that it takes some time to set up, and then it will take all your templates and generates for each locale a set of translated templates. So we've got to, you know, this whole bunch of things that we need to deploy. Switching template, like switching locales on the fly becomes problematic. So this is not ideal either. So what we can do together to make this situation better, like to make this whole translation story work for us as the community. Well, once again, the current situation is that we've got those very dynamic in-browser translations that suffer from some kind of performance problems. And we've got those build-time solutions that are very performant, but not very well defined. But whatever we do, in the current situation, doing translations right requires a lot of work. I mean, it's either the setup work or changing templates work. And obviously, the good developer is the lazy developer. So we should try to find something that is slightly easier and requires less effort from us. So why I'm saying that it requires a lot of effort. So if you go with the build time solution, you will have to set up the whole thing. But even if you go with the in-browser kind of replacement thing, you still got like several steps that you need to take before a template is translated. So let's imagine that we've got like this very simple template, right, in English. And someone is coming to us and saying like, okay, great that this website is very successful and works in English. Now we need to translate it to Dutch. So what you have to do is you have to go through all your templates, pull this piece of the string, give it an ID, which means you have to give it a name. And you know, there's this famous quote that there are only two hard problems in the computer science, right? There's like cache invalidation, naming things. So immediately going heads-on to one of the hardest problems in IT. And you have to find like those names for all the messages in your template. And you need to avoid collisions, right? You've got like 20 developers in your team. They will be coming up with the names. And you need to make sure the title is the same as my title, and so on and so forth. So this is kind of very boring piece of the work. And obviously, when you extract those things and name them, you need to ship this file to the translator. And when it comes back from the translations, you need to turn the thing that came from the translation to the format that is understood by the ng translator or some other tool. So there is a lot of kind of really boring and not very sexy steps that you need to take. And this is kind of summary of what I was saying. So AngularJS team kind of saw this problem, that like they had some kind of solution at Google that worked, that the build time solution, but it was specific to Google. It was closed source. It didn't benefit the community. So people say, like, come on, like we can do better. We can prepare something that would work for Google and for the entire community. And this is how the project started that goes into 1.4 time frame, and normally should also be usable in 2.0. And this project aims at solving this translation story for all of us. So what's the main idea between the proposed solution? So once again, we want to be lazy developers. So we want to turn this current approach into something slightly less verbose. So what we are saying here by sticking this E18 attribute, we are saying, here's the piece of text in this tag to translate. And let's use the text itself in your default language as the ID of the message. Right? Because either we use this, we are coming up with the like a artificial identifier, or we just say, let's use the English word or Dutch word or whatever your default language is. Let's use this particular message as the ID. And it might sound crazy at the beginning, but like, why not? And we could even go one step further and say, you know what? In fact, the whole template is to be translated. So why to stick those E18 tags at all, since we are translating everything? So let's not do anything. Right? This is brilliant. We've got nothing to do. It's fine, no? I mean, OK. So what are the benefits of this approach? So the first kind of idea behind this design was, like, we want to be able to introduce translations later. Because this like, translation or internalization is one of those boring things that people don't want to think about at the beginning. They're just like, oh yeah, my site became very successful. It will be good to deploy it to some other market, to some other locale. And now I've got this whole ton of work, this big headache on me. I need to introduce the translations. So we want the whole solution to be really easy to introduce for the existing templates. We want to eliminate one of the hardest problems in the computer science, right? We don't want to think about the names. But the other part is that we are keeping our templates with the default text, with the default English text, or whatever the initial language. So you can still open your template in the visual editor and see how it looks, right? You will not see just filter statements, but you can see the actual text. And we can give more context to translators. So there is a variant of this syntax. If you want to give like more context to translators, we could say this ENT attribute has also some description that will go to the translator. So now we've been talking a lot about the syntax somehow that we could use in the template. But what the project or what the current effort aims to tackle or cover is the entire process of translation from the from the time you build your template to translation, and with like tackling subsequent updates to your templates. So let's look at how it's going to work. So we've got our two actors here. There's a Joe developer, and Zoe, there is translator. And Joe, as the dev developer, web developer, he knows how to create templates, right? So he's going to create those templates without any thinking about the E18 problem. So now we are going to have a tool, like a command line interface tool, that will take all those templates here. We can run it through the tool, and what it's going to produce is the set of messages to translate. Right? So we are going to use the English text or whatever the default text as the message key. If we embed any instructions to translator, the tool is going to extract those as well. And prepare these messages to translate. Now, we as the web developers, we are so used to formats like JSON, I guess not so much to XML. But what the translators are using are pretty exotic formats. which are understood by the tools that they are using. So what we need to do is to make sure that we extract the messages to translate, but we also that we convert those to the format that is used by translators. So the idea is that this tool will be able to extract messages to translate, and then with some kind of system of plugins to convert the default format in JSON, for example, to the format used by another translation tool. And then as soon as Zoe translates all those messages, so she basically takes this file and produces translations for the locale, we could run another tool, either during the build time or during the runtime. I mean, by runtime, I mean in a browser, to actually take the existing templates, take the translations, and combine them together into HTML templates. Once again, idea is that we are going to have some kind of JavaScript logic that can do this generation of templates. And according to people preferences, this translation can be done either during the build time or during runtime in a browser, but the logic stays the same. But obviously, the whole translation process, it's not one-time effort. This whole thing kind of happens in circle, right? Because it's not like we do our template and we say like, okay, we are done forever. Usually, people will be modifying those templates. So it's also important that we can extract once again things and send to translation only things that have changed actually, right? I mean that we need to retranslate. So this is the whole idea of the process and tooling that we are trying to build in the 1.4 timeframe. I guess since we've got the only 2 weeks, I guess, to the official beta releases for 1.4, I guess only parts will make it to 1.4. But here's the call for action, and I'm really couldn't be happier more than the keynote today in the morning was about the community and like scratching your own itch or like stepping in and tackling hard problems. Because those ideas and those projects and tools, those things are cooking right now. And they are cooking in public. So there is the Angular E18 repository. When there is the code and with some early experiments, there is the whole design doc for I can show you. There's the whole design doc that describes, in greater details what I was talking about here. There is even a work split for 1.0. So if you say, okay, yeah, I really deeply care about like E18, but I'm using very specific format for my translators, you can step in and say like, okay, I'm going to do the plugin for my translators. We are constantly recording the design meetings. So, I mean, if you want to catch up with the work or discussions that were happening till now, it's still possible because I think they are even published on YouTube. They are very easy to find. If not, just there's a link in the slides. If you've got any problems finding them, just come chat to me. And there's like this problem is so large, and people are using such a amount of different techniques or like variants of workflows and so on. There's enough work for everyone. And we are very inclusive and very happy to chat about the specific needs that you might have. So once again, like my talk today is as much of like hinting on what's the state of the industry today, what we are trying to do in 1.4, but most of all, it's just call for action. Like, have a look at the ideas. I mean, just say it if it's like completely crazy or you love it, and step in, like building the parts that you feel like are most important for you. And I didn't show any demos or like any existing parts of the code, because I don't want to spoil the party for ngconf, where Chirayu with Pascal will be presenting those tools in actions. This is it in Dutch? I mean, that's good. So, kudos to Google. It has like really good translator. And I guess we've got some time to take questions. So the whole presentation is available already on GitHub.io. Feel free to shoot me an email, chat after the conference, shoot me an email or tweet me. Or Pascal, I guess he's as much familiar with the topic as I am, or even more. And once again, I mean, there's the part where we can make life easier for the whole community. So let's do it together. Thank you.